Have you ever wondered why some women leave without explanation, without closure, without so much as a word, and yet haunt a man's thoughts for years? It isn't the loud ones he remembers. It's the woman who said nothing, who vanished like smoke, who became a mirror, not a storm. He forgets the one who yelled. He forgets the one who demanded to be seen. But he cannot forget her, the one who didn't try to be remembered. Because her silence didn't scream. Revealed. She didn't fight for space in his life. She didn't craft a dramatic exit. She didn't explain her worth in long paragraphs. She simply watched, knew, and disappeared. And that very disappearance, so calm, so disorienting, was the beginning of his obsession. Not an obsession with her body, an obsession with her absence, with the question she left behind. Why didn't she fight for me? To the ego-driven man, silence feels like punishment, but to the spiritually attuned man, it feels like prophecy. And Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, knew this. He spoke of the soul's subtle contracts, of karmic meetings disguised as heartbreak, and he warned, the feminine energy that walks in silence holds the greatest power of all. This woman does not chase, she observes. She doesn't react, she recognizes. She doesn't punish, she departs. And it is that departure, done not with vengeance, but with unwavering self-respect, that unsettles the male psyche more than rage ever could. Because she doesn't give him the satisfaction of guilt, she gives him the burden of realization. You see, most men are conditioned to believe they have time, that the woman who waits will keep waiting, that her silence is passivity, that her patience is compliance. Until one day they look up, and she's gone. No trace, no closure, no farewell. And it is then, in the vacuum of her silence, that he begins to feel something deeper than regret, disintegration. Because what he lost wasn't just her presence. He lost the version of himself that could have become through her. She was never going to complete him. That's not her role. Her role was to awaken him, to confront his fragmented masculinity, to show him, through her stillness, the noise he carried within. And that silence? It didn't come from coldness. It came from clarity. She knew the moment she was no longer seen. She felt the moment he began to drift, energetically, emotionally, spiritually, and instead of clinging, she retreated into herself. Not because she didn't love, but because she loved herself enough to know when to stop giving. The woman who says nothing is not weak. She is wise. She has learned that explaining her worth to the wrong man is a soul-depleting exercise. So she becomes a ghost. Not to torment, but to teach. She becomes the echo of what was possible. And it is that echo that disrupts a man more than any confrontation. He revisits her in his dreams. Not her face, not her voice, but the feeling she left behind. That feeling of being fully seen and still unmet. He remembers the way she sat in silence with him, the way she didn't try to fix him, the way her energy felt like a mirror, showing him who he could be if he weren't hiding behind his ego. She didn't need to win him. She needed him to wake up. But the thing about awakening is this: it cannot be forced. It must be chosen. And he didn't choose. Now then. So she walked, not in bitterness, but in liberation. And now he walks through his life half awake, wondering why nothing feels like her. Because nothing is like her. She didn't need him to change. She just couldn't stay in a space that refused to grow. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the anima, the feminine soul within the male unconscious. She represented that anima, the deep, intuitive knowing, the emotional presence, the soul-level intimacy he didn't know how to hold. And so when she left, she didn't just exit his life. She exited his projection. The projection of control. The projection of being enough without doing the work. Now he sits alone, not in solitude, but in exposure. Exposed to everything he avoided. Exposed to the fact that her silence wasn't punishment. It was prophecy. And here's the most haunting truth. He cannot unsee what she showed him. No matter how many women come after, no matter how loud their laughter or sweet their words, he knows none of them will ever carry the silence she did. That sacred, terrifying, illuminating silence. The kind that isn't empty. It's full of answers he refused to hear. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because he never truly listened, not with his ears, but with his soul. The woman who says nothing has already said everything in the energy she carried, in her patience, in her quiet understanding, in the way she gave him space without retreating from her own center. Her stillness was never absence, it was depth. And men who operate only on the surface never learn to swim. They grow comfortable in shallow validation, in performative affection, in the echo chamber of conquest. But she wasn't there to be conquered. She was there to reflect. That's what tore him open the most. Not that she left, but that she never tried to prove herself. She let him live with his misunderstanding. She allowed him to believe the story he needed to survive. And that allowance, that silence, that non-response, it digs into a man's unconscious like a seed. He may go on with life, build new empires, hold new bodies, but something remains unfinished. Some part of him still waits for a reaction she will never give. That silence becomes his crucifixion. Because the masculine ego thrives on control, on understanding, on resolution. And she gave him none. She didn't give him her rage. She didn't give him her pain. She didn't give him her sorrow. She gave him her absence. And that is what he cannot forget. Years will pass. He will wonder if she still thinks of him. He'll play their moments on loop. Try to decipher the final days. Search for meaning in the look she gave before she walked away. But she's no longer playing that game. She outgrew the dynamics of imbalance. She outgrew trying to explain her softness to someone who hadn't met his own shadow. She outgrew needing to be chosen by someone who never chose himself. This is what Edgar Cayce understood when he spoke of soul contracts. That certain people are not in our lives to complete us, but to reveal where we've abandoned ourselves. She was his mirror, not his medicine. She came into his life quietly, offered something ancient and wild, something rooted in the feminine soul, unapologetic intuition. And when he failed to honor it, she didn't scream. She withdrew her field. That sacred, invisible force that wrapped around him when they were alone. The force he didn't understand until it was gone. He couldn't name it back then, but he feels it now, in the spaces between women who don't challenge him, in the laughter that sounds hollow, in the eyes that look at him but never truly see him. Because she saw him, and she said nothing. Not because there was nothing to say, but because she knew he wasn't ready to hear it. And now, in the stillness of night, her silence replays in his bones. It becomes the drumbeat of his restless mind, the pulse beneath his forced distractions. Not every woman is meant to stay. Some are meant to shake the ground beneath your feet, leave you questioning everything, and vanish, leaving you alone with your reflection. She didn't owe him a closing sentence. Her silence was the punctuation. She didn't owe him clarity. He had to become the clarity himself. And that is what hurts the most. He wanted her to wait for him to mature. He wanted her to stay while he figured it out. He wanted her to make excuses for his delay. But the feminine doesn't wait for evolution. She triggers it. And when she realizes he is not moving with her, she releases. Not with hatred, but with holy detachment. He still remembers the feeling of her energy pulling away. It wasn't abrupt. It wasn't cruel. It was silent, like the tide. Slow, certain, unstoppable. And now, long after the words have stopped, she speaks louder than ever. In his dreams, in his memories, in the way he flinches when someone says her name. Because the woman who says nothing leaves everything behind. Not in object, not in texts, but in imprints. and imprints never fade. He begins to realize far too late that her silence was never indifference. It was mercy. A mercy he didn't recognize because his ego mistook her absence for weakness. But the truth is, only a woman with deep inner stillness can walk away without a war. Only a woman who has met her own shadows can love without losing herself. That's what made her unforgettable. She didn't need to prove her love. She embodied it. She didn't try to convince him of her value. She radiated it. She didn't argue for space in his life. She vacated it with grace. And what he once perceived as fragility, he now sees as frightening strength. The woman who says nothing activates a man's deepest wounds, because her silence strips away all illusions. Without her words to project blame onto, he must sit with himself, with his patterns, his choices, his unfinished work. He replays it, how she held space for him, even when he was too disconnected to recognize it. How she leaned in. Galua, asking nothing except his presence. How she gave him her most sacred gift, her trust, and watched as he scattered it in his confusion. And then how she stopped. Not because she stopped loving, but because she started remembering who she was before he made her forget. This is the agony Edgar Cayce described in his readings, the spiritual wound that occurs when a soul fails to rise to its moment of initiation. She was his initiation, and he failed it not because he was cruel, but because he wasn't ready. And now, the feminine mystery that once stood before him has returned to source, to herself. She no longer orbits him. She no longer checks if he's grown. She no longer fantasizes about what could have been, because she's living it without him. And it's in that living, that expansion, that joy he no longer has access to, that he feels the full cost of his unconsciousness. You see, the woman who says nothing doesn't cut ties with noise. She cuts ties with clarity. And clarity doesn't scream. It simply steps away. He remembers how she never tried to control him. How she gave him space without withdrawing her love, until he made that space permanent. Now, his thoughts reach for her in silence. But energy once withdrawn is not easily reclaimed. Because she's no longer the woman who waited. She's become the woman he will never meet again. Not because she disappeared, but because she evolved. And that's the part no man prepares for, not just losing her, but losing the possibility of her. She has stepped into her fullness. And in that fullness, there is no room for hesitation, for ego, for half versions of love. He was given a window into something sacred, and he closed it. Now, every woman he meets pales in comparison, not because they lack value, but because they were never her. The woman who said nothing. The woman who left a lesson instead of a mess. The woman who spoke the loudest through her stillness. And even now, as he stares into the mirror of his own life, he hears her silence in the background, like a hymn. Not angry. Not bitter. Just done. She taught him what no words ever could. That feminine power doesn't need permission. That emotional intimacy cannot be faked. That the soul hears what the ears cannot. And most of all, that the woman who says nothing is not void of love. She is full of knowing. Knowing when to give. Knowing when to pause. And knowing when to walk away with her crown still intact. She will never return to him as the woman he once knew. Because now, she knows her worth. And the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.